Hello, students. Welcome to another session of Psychology in Media. In today's class, we are discussing about propaganda. So, what is propaganda? Let's see that. So, look at this. Propaganda is information, ideas, or rumors deliberately spread widely to help or hurt a person, group, movement, institution, or nation. Propaganda is information that is intended to persuade an audience to accept a particular idea or cause, often by using biased material or by stirring up emotions. Propaganda isn't an easy thing to define, but most students agree that it has to do with any idea or beliefs that are intentionally propagated. It uses words and word substitutes in trying to reach a goal. When I'm saying words, I mean the slogans, the pictures, the drawings, the graphics, the data, the music, the sounds, the theater, the films. All these material is used to promote an idea. Of course, propaganda is used in controversial matters, but it is also used to promote things that are generally acceptable and non-controversial. So there are different kinds of propaganda. They run all the way from selfish, deceitful, subversive effort to honest and above board emotion of things that are good. Propaganda can be concealed or open, emotional or containing appeals to reason, or a combination of emotional and logical appeals. In today's session, I will take you to the history of propaganda. And so let me show you this image. Who is he? He is Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte was a man of great talent, a skilled general, a cunning politician, and a charismatic leader of men. Another reason why his image is so firmly etched in history is that Napoleon was a great propagandist. Wars give rise to intensive propaganda campaigns. And it has made many persons suppose that propaganda is something new and modern. The word itself came into common use in this country as late as 1914. 1914, when the World War I began. But the truth is, however, that propaganda is not new and modern. Nobody would make the mistake of assuming that it is new. It has been there from early times, where churches used to propagate things. As I am showing you Napoleon Bonaparte, it was there during this time, and he used to propagate things. So during the rise of power and throughout his reign, Napoleon not only benefited from circumstances, but also cultivated his own image through the use of propaganda. Napoleon excelled at garnering public support and capitalizing on his victories to convey a persona associated with success and heroism. He utilized propaganda in a wide range of media. He used theater, art, newspapers, and bulletins to promote the precise image he desired. Napoleon's bulletins from the battlefields were published in newspapers, and they were well read throughout the country. He used these publications to exaggerate his victories and spread his glorified interpretation of these successes throughout France. Let me show you another image of Napoleon. Look at this image. It was it was made in 1830. This portrait was designed uh, to inspire loyalty and intimidate critics at a time when emperor's power was declining and France was besieged on all sides. It was originally hung in the council hall of Montpellier, but less than a year later, with Napoleon defeated, the painting was removed and it is said that it was returned to the artist with the bill unpaid. While propaganda arguably can be identified as the main factor of Napoleon's success, it is important to bear in mind that it functioned hand in hand with a multitude of indispensable factors, such as outstanding military talent Napoleon showed on the battlefields, and the very favorable social and political circumstances of France in his time. In modern times, when I'm talking about modern times, I'm talking about the era of World War. During that time, we associate propaganda with Adolf Hitler. Hitler is the art propagandist of our time. These are examples of his strategy in attempting to mold the opinion and attitudes of his intended victims to his own purposes. Division, doubt, and fear are the weapons he used within one nation and among allied countries arrayed against him. So what happened? What happened after the defeat of Germany in First World War? There was a military official called Erich Ludendorff. He suggested that British propaganda had been instrumental in their defeat. Adolf Hitler came to the echo this view, believing that it had been a primary cause of the collapse of morale and the revolts in German home front and navy in 1918. Later, the Nazis adapted many British propaganda techniques during their time in power. Most propaganda in Germany was produced by the Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. There was a person called Joseph Goebbels. He was placed in charge of this ministry shortly after Hitler took over in 1933. All journalists, writers, artists were required to register with this ministry, and ministry subordinate chambers for the press, fine art, and music, theatre, film, literature, or radio. So there was a kind of pre-censorship on media. I do have a photograph of Goebbels because he's very, very important person when we're talking about propaganda. He's Goebbels. So what happened? Dr. Joseph Goebbels, uh, worked hand in hand with Hitler. Whether or not propaganda was truthful or tasteful was irrelevant to the Nazis. Goebbels once wrote in his diary that, I may quote, let me quote it. No one can say your propaganda is too rough, too mean. These are not criteria by which it may be categorized. It ought not be decent, nor ought it be gentle or soft or humble. It ought to lead to success. What does it mean? It means that your propaganda can be rough, can be hard, can be right on the face. It it should not be gentle, soft, or humble. The only aim is to reach to the success. Hitler once wrote a book named as Mein Kampf, and Mein Kampf was banned at several countries. And in Mein Kampf, he wrote that to achieve its purpose, propaganda must, I quote, be limited to a very few points and must harp on these in slogans until the last member of public understands what you want him to understand by a slogan. I repeat, last member of the public understands what you want him to understand by your slogans. Some Nazi propaganda used positive images to glorify the government's leaders and its various activities, projecting a glowing vision of national community. Nazi propaganda could also be ugly and negative, creating fear, loathing by portraying those the regime considered to be enemies as dangerous and even subhuman. The Nazis' distribution of anti Semitic films, newspapers, cartoons, and even children books aroused centuries old prejudices against Jews. Hitler and Goebbels worked together. So Hitler met Goebbels almost every day to discuss the news, and Goebbels would obtain Hitler's thoughts on the subject. Goebbels then met with senior ministry officials to pass down the official party line on world events. Broadcasters and journalists required prior approval before their works were disseminated. There was censorship. Along with posters, the Nazis produced a number of films and books to spread their belief. On March 13th, 1933, the Third Reich established a ministry of propaganda, appointing Joseph Goebbels as its minister. Goals were to establish external enemies countries and internal enemies. So, who were the internal enemies? The internal enemies were Jews, the Romans, and Bolsheviks, and and all the art forms were degenerated and they were talking they were demeaning internal and external enemies. See, there were different methods which were used by Hitler. So these are the methods. Hitler and Nazi Party were a constant presence in the life of German people. The infamous swastika symbol appearing on every government uniform and public building. Pictures of Hitler displayed everywhere. Germans having to greet each other with Hail Hitler, raised arm salute. The government department responsible for all this was none other than Ministry of Enlightenment and Propaganda. It was headed by Dr. Joseph Goebbels. He's a very, very important person. It aimed to brainwash people into obeying the Nazis and idolizing Hitler. And these are the methods used by him. Censorship of the press. All the newspapers were controlled by the government and could only print stories which were favorable to Nazi regime. Control of radio broadcasts. Radios were sold very cheap so that most Germans could afford one. All radio output was controlled by Goebbels' ministry through the Reich Broadcasting Corporation. Mass rallies. These public displays of support for Nazism involved music, speeches, demonstration of German strength. The biggest one was held each year in August at Nuremberg. It was a sports event. You can see the poster here. This is out from Berlin, when Berlin hosted the Olympics in 1936, which the Nazis used as the opportunity to showcase the success of regime and to demonstrate the superiority of Aryan race. Loudspeakers in public places also blurred out Nazi propaganda. Much of the information Germans received reinforced the message of Aryan racial superiority, whilst demonizing the Jews and other enemies of the regime. The Nazis' interest in and influence on all these areas demonstrates the extent to which the party sought to control German life and win over the population of Nazi cause. This is how the propaganda was used by Hitler. It's not that Hitler was the only one using propaganda during this time. There were many different political parties and people from different, believing in different ideologies who were using propaganda. In our next sessions, we will actually see that how different people from different ideologies were using propaganda and how these posters were used. As I mentioned earlier, that Hitler was inspired by British propaganda. So this was the poster uh, which was a part of British propaganda, which talked about crush the Germans. This poster is from World War One, was designed to encourage donations towards the war effort from British public. The use of a 5 shilling piece provided added symbolic impact as it features the image of St. George slaying a dragon. So such posters were an important part of propaganda. This, this is another poster. This is a Nazi poster of Second World War, and this poster was used by the German Nazi Party to drum up the donation for youth hostels and homes. But most of the money was used for weapon production and war costs. So, with this, I end my today's class on propaganda, and I will continue it in the next session. Thank you.